We welcome you all to the semi-finals of the 10th annual Shanti Narayan Memorial We congratulate both teams for reaching this far. We'd request Prime Minister to repeat the motion once.
He doesn't know.
Wait now.
Someone read out the motion for the benefit of everyone.
He's reading.
Comments mein dal do.
This house believes that atheists should organize themselves as a collective.
What's the panel? Oh wait, great. You're giving time?
No.
Give me a minute, wait. Madam Speaker, I'm going to be talking to you about three things today. I'm going to be talking to you about what essentially is atheism, what are its core tenets, and why essentially it's different from any other religion, right? I'm going to be talking to you about the problems that face us as atheists and the kinds of issues that we face in mainstream society the world over. And finally, I'm going to be talking to you about our move and what essentially we're going to do to correct this, right? So what essentially is atheism? And we think it's extremely important to understand that there's a distinction between the scientific rationalism that is propagated by, say, a Sam Harris or a Richard Dawkins, because we don't think that is the sole representation of atheism that exists, right? We think there are people who believe in chaos theory, we think there are people who believe in hedonism, nihilism, people who believe that atheism has really, there is really no reason why this world exists. We think atheism has existed in different forms in different points in time in society. So you had the Karvaks and whatnot in the 4th century, you had atheism in Greece and all of this, right? What we mean by this is atheism has never had any, say, supporting core tenets that have always associated the fact that their only core belief is that there is no personified superior being that is in the sky or operates in the world, right? What essentially this means is that the source of dogma is automatically stripped away from atheism. Because where does dogma stem into religion from, right? The fact that the word of God is the way in which you verify truth. So therefore, in religion you'll have things like blasphemy because you simply cannot question the word of God that is given. However, in atheism, where there is no source or the source of truth is not God and everything becomes open to questioning, everything has to be defended and no truth is absolute. In that situation, we see no reason why things can't be questioned and won't be questioned in an atheist system, right? We think as long as the source of dogma since the source of dogma is this idea that truth is absolute because it stems from a being who is timeless, eternal and can never be wrong, that is when you become dogmatic. As long as we no longer have that belief, dogma does not exist, right? But what are the problems facing us as the atheist community today, right? We think the biggest problem we face today is a lack of representation, right? Before I move on, yeah.
Isn't the absence of dogma related to, since absence of no collective means there's no standardized text, signs,
absolutely not, right? So I'm coming to my move. We think we will have texts, but we won't have a canon. We will have leaders, but we will not have a messiah. We will not have a pope. We're okay with, say, democratically electing leaders. We're okay with ditching things in the canon. We're okay if people don't read the canon. That's not how our religion is going to work, because in our religion, you don't have to follow everything because reprisal is going to come in the form of a god, right? That's precisely why we don't think that any sort of text is going to automatically become canon. But that's going a little ahead, right? What are the problems facing us? We think there is a massive lack of representation that we see the world over, right? For instance, can you think of a single person who has run for president who was atheist, right? You simply cannot. Even though black people have been able to run for president, Latinos, women, all have been able to run for president, there is simply no representation in popular culture, in the mainstream, at the positions of power of atheists today, right? At that point in time, we think this lack of representation has really hurt our community because our community has been equated with this idea of complete bad morality, right? We think people constantly feel isolated when they're atheists because people think these are fatalists who think the world is just going to end. There's just a crazy phase they're going through. They're not people who you have to take seriously. And we think in that context, you are really isolating individuals who have this belief system, right? But moreover, we think another important thing is a safe space for atheists, right? Because far too often, atheists face reprisal for their beliefs, right? And in this context, we think a collective that is atheist is going to provide a support system that atheists can rely on even when they face their entire community telling them them, no, you're absolute rubbish for having these beliefs, or even physically harm them as they do in many places of the world, right? Moreover, we think there is a complete lack of a social structure that accompanies religion, right? So for instance, you have, say, Alcoholics Anonymous that are set up in churches, right? You have support groups that are set up around like gurudwaras or other things like that, right? You have all sorts of ways in which religion benefits its proponents, right? There is nothing like that for atheists, and because of the isolation that I already spoke to you about, they feel these are the people who require these social support structures far more, right? And we think in this context, an atheist collective is the sole way in which this propagation can happen without force feeding them the morality that you have to that these places are attached with God, right? So I shouldn't have to, like, if I want to eat or if I want to go and deal with my alcoholism, I shouldn't have to go to a church the same way a Muslim today shouldn't have to go to a church to worship his own God or get his supplies, right? Moreover, we think atheists themselves evolve better when we have a collective, right? So the problem that atheism faces today is there are a few prominent atheists who get to shape what atheism looks like, right? That's why Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris are the first thing that click in our mind when we think of atheists, right? When we have a collective that can represent a larger variety of people, that actually allows atheists to come together and discuss what it means to be an atheist, in that context you have an evolution of atheism itself, right? And we think in this context atheism itself becomes constantly evolving, right? Now coming to our move, right? We have no problem adopting the functionality of religion, right? So we're okay with like there being texts, we're okay with there being a leader, we're okay with there being a festival. However, the difference becomes all of these things are questionable, ladies and gentlemen. Every single belief can be questioned, every single text can be questioned, and because the questioning can come because none of these texts have been ordained by God, right? There are mortals who have told you that this text is good, so therefore you can question them. In the Bible, it is God who has written it down, and clearly you can't go against God because then you'll be going to hell, right? All of these systems work in the way in which religion works to prevent questioning is through linking all of its tenets to a being who cannot be questioned. The absence of that is why we believe atheism is important. But even if we do become dogmatic, right, we think even that's alright, because we face so many problems as a group. We think even a dogmatic group deserves to have some sort of representation, deserves to have a collective, right? Why are we okay with dogmatic religions existing and having their churches and stuff, right? Because it helps people, ladies and gentlemen. And we think anything that helps atheists today is something that will benefit us. Moreover, we think even in the worst case scenario where we become like an entrenched system and whatnot, as long as the core belief that there is no God and therefore all words cannot be this sacrosanct thing that can't be questioned, even in that context, our dogma will be one which is constantly supported by rational thought or constantly supported by rational defenses, right? That's why we think that even in our most dogmatic form, we will still be open to questioning, right? Sure, you may face a lot of social costs, but there will never be dogma. We're very proud.
ऐसी बात याद कर यार सॉरी हाँ वही बोल रहा हूँ हाँ मैं बोल हाँ Is anyone ready? All right. Madam Speaker, let's analyze the farcical need the side government has created for you in terms of how we need representation, how we need an atheist Alcoholic Anonymous, and how necessarily we need to have debates between nihilism and hedonism for some organization or institution to exist, and therefore none of these can happen any way whatsoever. And we believe the kind of exclusivity they're coming out with the model, or the need they've created, or the outcomes they've created are largely on a farcical level, because A, why do you need that? They haven't explained to you. But why necessarily will you get those benefits? Because the moment he functions on a slippery slope, he's saying nothing to prevent from it becoming a dogmatic religion in the first place, and the lack of questioning in the first place. So what is, if functioning on what is, it will then become a dogmatic religion also. Then what will you do? Will you go ahead and say, no, we wanted a questioning religion, it became a dogmatic religion, it became a dogmatic institution? Then what do? We do not know, Madam Speaker. We do not think there is enough concrete or tangible benefits coming out to atheists as an atheist individual, or coming out to atheists or debates within atheism within that matter, right? Why we believe that's so, right? Because A, when they say we want a certain sort of representation, A, for what? B, as what? Do you want a certain sort of representation in the United States of America? Do you want the president to be an atheist, right? A, when you base it in the idea that you want an atheist as a president, the debates around the president do not remain on the policies anymore. They become about his cultural beliefs, which have already been vilified for so many years, which are not necessarily being catered to by the other people, or not necessarily believed by the other people. The debates now necessarily are based on not on the credential of the presidential candidate, but on the kind of person he is, on the kind of background he's coming from in terms of an atheist. Because they need to necessarily tell you why in the United States of America, necessarily a black president discriminates against atheists, or the modern secular states that are coming up necessarily discriminate against atheists, or do not give them the same benefits as you do give people who subscribe or ascribe to other religions, right? We do not believe that's the matter in any case. We do not think there's enough of a need for a representation in terms of how you necessarily need a person to subscribe to atheism to necessarily cater to your needs, right? Madam Speaker, we also believe that the kind of theories you talk about in the first place, and when he begins with the speech of Sam Harris or chaos theory, what's preventing those theories from trying to become a certain sort of dominant narrative, from trying to take over debates within the institution, because hey, well, we do not like questioning our own theories, right? What's the incentive for the chaos theory to become all-inclusive in nature, or represent all atheists in that manner? We do not believe it is a collectivized institution in the first place. Therefore, any benefit of representation, any benefit of debate within that do not come as a collective anyway, right? We do not think that essentially is a benefit that you have. We also, then they talk to you about how necessarily we have a certain sort of idea of collectivization, right? That collectivization necessarily means that we have something like an atheist anonymous where you cater to alcoholics. We don't think why necessarily you can't go to doctors who say, hey, you shouldn't be an alcoholic, or can't necessarily subscribe to doctors who say, hey, well, alcohol is bad for you. We don't think why that's an exclusive idea coming out of forming an atheist organization that will give you an atheist Alcoholic Anonymous. We don't think there's an exclusivity in that, right? They also explain the value of the questioning it talks about between debates between nihilism and hedonism within the structure, because how does that necessarily help an alcoholic atheist, or how does that necessarily help you from getting a leader elected to the United States of America who subscribes to atheism, given that he has not discriminated against you in the first place anyway? We believe the kind of atheism to talk about is not necessarily a collective. Atheism in itself functions within an individual paradigm where it is born out of an antithesis to the conditions of organized religion, and not just religion within itself, not to the beliefs, but to the kind of organizational structure that religions themselves follow. It functions in an individual paradigm wherein your idea of atheism is necessarily pandering to your own individual beliefs, and necessarily born as an antithesis to the kind of situations you're living in, right? We do not think there's a collectivization of atheism within itself, or when it talks about the different theories, we do not think there's a collectivization on that. We do not think the exclusive value of collectivizing that comes in any way, right? We believe the idea of atheism is not to cater to an idealization of behavior, and the kind of debates they're talking about, they haven't told you why necessarily if you question the two theories will you get a certain sort of concrete analysis into terms of giving you a propaganda to base yourselves on, or necessarily lobbying in terms of governments, or give you a certain sort of unified propaganda. Really, that is a problem, because the kind of permeation or the organization of propaganda of religion happens on when you have a single unified leader, or when you have a single unified structure or a symbol or a text. Because how do you then prevent anyone from making text or what you believe should be a questionable text to be a canon in the first place, right? We do not believe necessarily that kind of individual paradigm when atheism itself functions in, that will necessarily become or is good enough to become a collective. They haven't told you why necessarily atheists from different backgrounds need to come together to necessarily go ahead and oppose the idea of religion within itself, because the idea of atheism is, hey, well, I don't believe in you, and not, hey, well, you should believe in what I believe. That's the kind of vilification we're not looking for as atheists, right? And that's the kind of belief that atheists do not have. Because what happens when you form a collective? And before that, go ahead, PY.
What stops different people who have different theories about atheism from forming different sects of atheists collectively.
Ari, that's the kind of problems exist within religion also, right? The kind of sectoral tensions within religion and the kind of sections exist within religion because debates are not just between religions but also within religions. The idea of different sects forming as an opposition to each other between Shia Sunnis, what's the kind of value stopping them from becoming violent in nature and then becoming the same kind of religion you're opposing in the first place? We do not think that stops anything from that happening, right? And the cost of the individual for the atheist, right? Because now there's further vilification in terms of how necessarily all you wanted was to spread your propaganda, all you wanted was to become the person you were opposing in the first place, and all you wanted was the kind of lobbying on a, say, political level, right? We believe that's the kind of vilification that now furthers on the atheist agenda. But what also happens is the kind, when they have to necessarily say that if a person wants to join this atheist religion for some odd reason, what's the incentive for this atheist to intermingle with the other person, given that that person has necessarily vilified the kind of lifestyle that atheist was living in? Necessarily they have to tell you why an atheist becomes an atheist when someone tells, hey, you should become an atheist, is an amazing thing to do, necessarily, and not why when atheist has a kind of self-awareness when that person necessarily subscribes to the idea of an antithesis to religion. They have to necessarily tell you why necessarily now atheists will be converted, or other people will be converted to atheism, or necessarily why will people buy into your ideology in that case, right? What also they have to do is to tell you a certain sort of pertinent need as to why atheists need to do that. Because, hey, well, Alcoholics Anonymous can be exclusive out of the idea of the atheist sect in this case, or the atheist organized collective in this case, right? Madam Speaker, we also believe that the kind of debates they're looking for do not have an inherent value in them once you go ahead and form that atheist collective. Because when did those theories come out, right? The theories did not come out of when you had a collective in the first place. The theories came out of the fact that people who believed in certain ideas formulated those theories. Those theories did not need a structure to come out. Atheism did not need a structure to come out of anything, right? We believe the kind of states we're living in and the kind of states that were functioning on this paradigm do not discriminate against atheists, give this idea of a formulation of theories, give this idea of an individual paradigm within atheism functions in. We do not believe they have anything to stop from this atheist collective from becoming the kind of religion they're already opposing, or the violence they're already opposing, or the kind of people they're already opposing. We believe that invites further vilification, we believe that invites further classification, and also invites the kind of inter-violence or inter-confusion within the atheist collective. We believe those are problems which they have to cater to. They haven't catered to. They haven't told you the exclusive benefit of forming an atheist collective. Neither they have told you how necessarily this will function in any case. We're really proud to oppose.
I know. That's it. One. Okay. Can I start? Ladies and gentlemen, let's look at historically things that you haven't been able to question at all and the reason behind that, right? Things that you haven't been able to question are religion and the state. Why can't you question religion and the state? The state because of sedition laws that will inherently punish you outwardly, and religion because of blasphemy laws that will also physically punish you. The reason you can question everything else without fear is because there is no active punishment, right? And that's something you have to understand, right? When they go ahead and say social pressure is punishment, by that logic, when you say Star Wars sucks, that is also social pressure punishing you, right? And that's something they have to understand, right? Because it is based in the idea that there is no holy belief like the way there is the holy idea of the state and the holy idea of God, right? This is literally based in the fact that there is a self-reflexive nature to the center of your belief, right? A belief that necessarily looks inward and is able to question itself, right? Because that middle speech is spent upon collectivization leading to standardization and therefore leading to a standard religion that everyone has to follow. We don't think that happens when a core tenet of it is the fact that you can question every point of that belief, right? So in our POI, when we ask him what happens in religion and sects, right, he says, yes, religion has sects, Shia Sunni come up. Yes, the fact that Shia Sunni can come up in a religion that is so dogmatic, that is so, their truth is not relative. Look, you can have different functions, right? You can have that in atheism even more, right? Because it can be more representative and more malleable to what you want, right? Because it looks inwards and forces you to question what necessarily truth is, right? Because unlike in their move, truth is always relative for atheists, right? And that's something they have to constantly defend, right? Dawkins, when he has to defend, however popular he is, right, the way he can defend himself is not, I am Dawkins and therefore what I write is true, but this is what I have written and this is the proof of it, right? And therefore somebody can come ahead and oppose that very truth because the truth doesn't stem from Dawkins but from what necessarily he has found and written, and that's something that they have to engage with, right? Finally, when he says things like the need hasn't been established, right, that's absolutely ridiculous, right? Because here's the idea over here. The reason why atheism necessarily needs a need of collectivization is because people are genuinely hounded for being godless, right? And we believe the idea of being godless is not something that should be in the 21st century. No, be in the 21st century something should be something that you are attacked upon, right? Because understand this, when you say you are godless, when you're teenagers, you are told it's a phase, right? And therefore you are completely removed the realm of nihilism and fatalism, that he doesn't understand what life lives, he's not mature enough to understand these ideas, and we believe these are harmful things, right? More than that, we believe throughout the ages, women who have genuinely been not religious have been told they're godless, right? We've been told the fact that because you don't believe in God, you are this loose woman, right? And we genuinely believe it has least because of the fact that religion and the state have so often co-opted to create oppression, you need atheism to go ahead and represent the needs of these people who have been oppressed by both the state and religion, right? Something that they have to engage with. Because when Middle Comment says they haven't established a need, the idea here is, even if we hadn't established a need, tell us why this is a bad move, right? Other than the fact that collectivization in general is bad. Because you have to tell us necessarily what's wrong in the fact that you want to collectivize where you're not having a dogmatic belief that can't be questioned, right? It's not good enough. Yes.
In the 21st century, people are hounding you for being in the 21st century model secular state. If people are hounding you for being like an atheist, can you file a police complaint and the state refuse to comply?
Okay, that's ridiculous. Okay, yes, even if you can, right? What logic is like? Of course you can, but the idea over here is it doesn't remove by their own logic social pressure, right? So the state might mandate it, but social genuine recognition of atheism can only come when you collectivize and genuinely have this idea that, look, this is accepted widely. That comes to my most important point. Social collectivization leads to social acceptance, right? And that is the idea over here. It's not just within the dark corners of libraries that you find atheism now, right? You can generally see it on the news. You can generally see it in public parks. You can see it in libraries, right? Because here's the thing. When we talk about atheist place of worship can be libraries, right? And that is the idea over here. The more it is in the public space, the more people have to engage with the idea of it being in the public space, right? When he goes and says, you can file a police complaint, of course, you can file a police complaint about rape in India. What good does that do until unless people are actively talking about it, right? And that's something he has to engage with. Only when you let atheism come into the public realm are you truly safe as an atheist, right? But more importantly, right, and it's something that they have to engage with the nature of what atheism in essence is, right? Because all beliefs are never going to be truistic, right? Because of the fact that through the ages we constantly have to deal with truistic beliefs, right? So if you look at how history has turned out, autocracies have moved to democracies because autocracies necessarily weren't being able to question themselves, right? You couldn't question the supreme leader, you couldn't question the supreme state, right? But you've moved away from this idea of not questioning and truistic belief, right? So in the 21st century, if you say that atheists shouldn't collectivize, it's genuinely telling you that truth is something that shouldn't remain in the relative sense, right? And we believe when truth is relative, it at least has certain kind of representation in the public sphere, right? Finally, right, we have to truly understand that what are the problems with this move that they've highlighted, right? Because in Midul's speech, he has said things like, okay, you know what if people become violent, right? Then you have violent atheism and you now have them representing you. Yes, we said the same thing. Do you think Islam is inherently violent? No, right? Islam can have violent tendencies, but you don't ban Islam because it is violent, right? You deal with it, you engage with it, right? And the fact that with Islam you can engage with it means atheism you can engage with it even more, right? Because here's the idea. If you are violent in atheism, it's something that you can be questioned upon and your response can't be, I did this for Supreme Leader Dawkins, right? Because that would be ridiculous. Finally, right? Within that, if their only problem that they've reduced it to, right? Because there are a couple of questions they have to answer. A, even if they think we haven't given a need, which is absolutely ridiculous, they have to tell us why, if this ineffectual move has done anything to atheism. B, they have to necessarily tell us how there's a direct link between collectivization and dogmatism, where you are propagating the fact that truth is relative, right? They have to engage with the fact that truth is relative. The same way that you can say Citizen Kane is a good movie and one of you can yell at me and tell me Citizen Kane is a bad movie. movie, right? You will not be punished for saying these things because there is no active punishment in going against me talking about atheism, right? That's something that they necessarily have to engage with and tell us how this can become dogmatic when, yes, a personality cult can be created, but that personality cult isn't based on the fact that that personality is that personality, right? And that's something that they have to truly engage with, right? Another question that they have to answer, right? Think about things that you can't question and where they arise from, right? Because if they want to run this case upon the fact that atheism can have certain rogue elements, they have to prove to us why those rogue elements can completely overshadow the benefits of having a collectivized atheist religion that can go ahead and genuinely propagate things for people who are always oppressed. And with that, we're very glad.
Wait, there's a sheet of yours here.
No, that I'm not taking.
Here.
Who's keeping time? 1, 6, and 7, please. Great. Their case is this. A discussion between a nihilist and a hedonist is going to lead to the creation of an Alcoholics Anonymous for atheists, and we think that that's the greatest thing that can ever happen to us. We will make our library the temple. That's literally it. What do they talk about in terms of the tenets and what is it that they want to achieve? What does Raghav start with? In terms of the fact that, listen, understand, there is no core tenet. There exists multiple ideas that are skewed away from the ideal scientific negation of, say, God, etc., etc. The point at which he agrees that truth is relative. Therefore, there exists an idea where I can have the scope of emancipation of saying my opinion is also the right opinion. The point at which you go and standardize, there is something that is acceptable and there is something that is not acceptable. Therefore, truth does not remain relative because you are skewing away from it if you don't believe in particular ideas. And that's why we think like truth is relative in status quo versus in their particular model. But let's talk about the second idea. What does this collectivization demand? If you're arguing that fragmentation is important and that's something that we need to preserve, what does collectivization bring? Collectivization, just like religion, demands standardization. Therefore, the text, the leader, etc., etc. The fact that I am a good Muslim because I need to cut a bakra on Eid, the fact that I am a good Hindu woman because I need to say, for example, fast for my husband, are ideas that have been standardized in terms of what is it to be a good Hindu and what is it to be a good Muslim. And this is the exact standardization that you regret when you start your speech, and that's exactly what you're creating through this process to begin with. But the second idea where they say, listen, we think like even if they don't agree to our leaders, even if they don't agree to the text is okay, then what is it that you're creating? If they don't agree to your relative truth, then you're literally not achieving anything on your side of the house, because that again like leads to status quo. So we don't think like that even if argument will ever stop, then by that logic you'll also become like fuck that. Next idea. Then what are the problems? Their problems are literally this. There's a lack of representation. Their analysis for this is literally we've never had an atheist president. What is this representation worth of? Why do you need this representation? And now I'm going to deal with characterization that came into both of their speeches. Listen, the idea is this. We think that the state is hounding us. False ideas. This existed in 50s and 60s. Right now in the 21st century secular state, you are allowed the capacity of not having your religion and still living peacefully. Therefore, that characterization is farcical to begin with. What happens the moment you become a belief? Because it isn't anti-theism, it's atheism. You're a non-thing. The point at which you have to hold a belief because of this relative truth, you're also bargaining with the state for the same like special interests like other religious groups do. What is it that you can do with the state, even if the state is oppressing you or pushing you down, is to stop these religious groups from hounding you. You can still go there, which is where his ideas, but social pressure will still exist. And let's deal with the social pressure for a moment. What is the social pressure? The social pressure comes from the fact that I will not accept you. How is this discussion or collectivization or me moving in packs of 5 leading to that acceptance? Because that acceptance isn't coming because you don't have my belief, not because you don't move in packs of 5. Therefore, that acceptance that they're talking about simply in terms of cohesion is something that they don't achieve by the end of the debate, a problem that they've identified and one that they haven't solved on this side of the house. So we think the secular state exists. Second idea, listen, we think the problem is that in terms of the fact that there is a lack of representation, we want to create representation, except this form of representation is antithetical to that very idea. Because when you talk about Dawkins, etc., etc., and you start with the characterization that these people have controlled the narrative for long, what stops them them from becoming the leaders and the messiahs of this movement? What stops them to ride on that popularity and make that the be all and end all and be the representatives of it? And what do you do from this representation is something that they haven't told you at all. What is the second problem? The second problem is, listen, we don't have an Alcoholics Anonymous of our own, and that's a really sad thing. Except go to the doctors, like to ask them what is it that you can do about alcohol. Because what does Alcoholics Anonymous do? Because this is funny. They use belief to tell you why you shouldn't have alcohol. The point at which you don't have a belief, what do you want them to use to teach you why you shouldn't have alcohol? So your anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous isn't something that you give even by the end of that discussion. We don't see that as a tangible problem or a solution that's coming from that side of the house. Second, we think that there's some form of questionability. Except to everything, there's some cost-benefit analysis. What is this questionability? Who is this truth relative to? What are you trying to get? You're saying we want to create questionability, except what is this questionability to and what are you getting, right? So the questionability is we want to question the assumptions that exist in status quo to ourselves. Except that status quo, you can go ahead and question yourself and have discussions. Except in their model, that questionability necessarily needs to result into a standard idea of both of us conceding to what the idea of atheism is, therefore creating a belief, because both of us need to concede to a commonality and a concessionary idea of what a common belief is. Therefore that questionability exists an idea which isn't atheistic anymore. Second, we think people can't question the state. Yeah, go on.
Tawfiq, when a bad Muslim doesn't do what someone tells him to do, he is charged with blasphemy laws or is told he's going to hell. What happens if a bad atheist says something against Dawkins?
When a bad atheist in status quo says something against Dawkins, because there is no idea of acceptance, they say, yeah, you're right. The point at which Dawkins becomes your priest, you will be necessarily held against, people will kill you and they will stone you. And that's the exact problem that arises, the point at which Dawkins writes on the, yeah, like keep shaking your head, come talk in your speech. Second, we think that there isn't an idea in terms of hedonism and nihilism, and hedonism and nihilism need to necessarily be preserved. Except the point is this, the point at which there exist two ideas of what it is to be atheist, and you're talking about a sense of questionability that must now come. Tell me why that sense of questionability cannot come in the absence of this discussion still existing while not collectivizing. So we're not saying that we're against the idea of not being dogmatic, except you become dogmatic the point at which there is an idea, because that questionability needs to necessarily come from a source that you will be continuously questioning. So what are you indulging then in? You're indulging against religions who also defend the same things that you're actually against. You're against the idea of religion holding people to certain ideas. And now is where I talk to you about what the idea of atheism primarily is. Why is it that I'm an atheist, or why do I become this? I become an atheist because I value other identities over things like my religious identity. I don't want my religious identity to be the one where I'm recognized through it. The point at which you say we want to glorify and push for an atheist identity, it's antithetical to the fact that I want to preserve other identities that I think are much more important for me, rather than pushing this idea of an atheist identity and, like, say for example, like collectivizing with the government. Then we say, listen, the government won't listen to you. Except, like, understand this. In status quo, in the 21st century secular state, of course this debate can't be set in Saudi Arabia, right? Therefore, what are we talking about? A 21st century secular state. What happens in status quo to atheists? Religious groups continuously have an infighting in terms of, like, you are bad or you are bad because my God is better. You enter the same form of infighting because your text, your leader, your aggressive campaigning are people that you're again campaigning with. Therefore, I want to make you an atheist is antithetical to the idea of atheism, because you should not be pushed to have a belief that you don't want to have. So you aren't actually promoting anything because there isn't anything is what you're promoting to begin with. Therefore, that's exactly what you will end up doing, because the creation of the text, the leader, and then what does Raghav say? Don't listen to our text, don't listen to our leader. Then what are you achieving? Because your questionability is then again not leading to any form of consensus, except in your model, that consensus values one opinion and devalues the other opinion. In our model, in status quo, there exists value to both opinions because there doesn't exist an acceptability to one particular idea. Therefore, that questionability in essence is much more beneficial on our side of the house. They won't hound you, Rag, don't worry. Extremely proud to oppose.
Hey man, just for my speech. What kind of access is that? After my speech. No tapping flip lights. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, there are three major themes that have emerged during the course of this debate. Firstly, does collectivization equal standardization? Secondly, even if collectivization equals standardizations, are there benefits that accrue from this collectivization for atheists? And lastly, how will atheism change with the onset of this sort of collective identities? Let's first talk about this idea of what do we mean when we say collectivize, right? Because they come up and they say that we think that any kind of collectivization is based on some kind of agreement, and any kind of agreement leads to constant dogmatism, right? However, the question to that becomes, then why aren't any social movement considered dogmatic, right? We don't think that they are. We think that social movements, for example, constantly change. Why? Because what is the point on which everyone agrees? And that is something that they have to deal with. They cannot come up and say that any kind of agreement is going to lead to dogmatism. We tell you that there is a very specific reason for dogmatism within religions. And what is that specific reason, right? We think that the reason that you have a dogmatism within religion is because you believe that there is one truth. That one truth is only one because God has said that truth, and God is absolute. If God was not absolute, if he was an imperfect being, then that truth is open to change, right? Which is why you say the truth does not change because God is a perfect person and anything that God says is perfect. And that is why when a woman, say, goes out and does something that her religion tells her not to do, she will be punished under blasphemy laws. Not because there is an agreement, a social agreement, and that's why there is social pleasure, but because God has said something and that results in direct physical reprisal, right? And we think that is the way in which religion keeps itself dogmatic, keeps itself from questioning, because you cannot question God, because if you could question him, he would be a human being and not a God, right? And that's where we come to our idea of what do we mean when we say truth is relative, because they say, okay, once you say truth is relative, that's also an absolute statement, so your atheism becomes absolute. However, what does that actually mean, right? Because they do have to deal with the meanings of words. We tell you that truth is relative does not mean that you can come and say anything you want and everyone is correct. Truth is relative means that you have to prove your truth, not say that your truth is true because God said it, right? And we think that the foundation here then becomes that proof is the source of truth. Proof is the source of anything that you say. And when Richard Dawkins goes up and there's a personality cult around him, yeah, sure, there will be a personality cult around him. Where does that personality cult come from? From the proof that he provides for the non-existence of God, not from the fact that he's good looking and God chose him, right? And we think that's where the kind of dogmatism that they are talking about stems from within religion. They come up and they try to paint this as some sort of ideologically inconsistent move because atheism is founded on opposition to organization. We don't think that's the case. We don't think atheism is the belief that everything is good. We think atheism is the belief that God does not exist. And we think that in that context, why does God not exist? Because we have evidence that he does not. Not because someone has told us God does not exist. Which is why we tell you our movement is going to be less dogmatic even towards religions, right? Because now when a religious person comes to you and says God does exist, the point is not, no, he doesn't, screw you, fuck you. The point is, why do you think he exists? And that's where this dogmatism is pivotally questioned. And this is what comes to the next point, because the real point of this debate is not even dogmatism, guys. The real point of this debate is, even if they are dogmatic, even if they are violent, even if they're a bunch of crazy assholes, why should we not let them collectivize? And this is where we come up and we tell you that all religions are dogmatic and you allow them to exist. Why do you allow them to exist? Because they provide utility to the people who believe in them. And this is where we come up and we tell you that there are benefits that accrue to atheists and status quo from the collectivization of atheism. And what are those benefits, right? Because we come up and we tell you something very simple. Today, if I do not believe in God, I can't talk to my parents about it because my parents probably believe in God. I can't talk to my state about it because when I go to court to file the criminal complaint that they're talking about, literally the court wall says, in God we trust, right? I can't go out and watch movies about atheists where atheists are normal, nice, children-loving women, because any atheist woman on TV is shown to be like a vamp slut, right? And we think that's because the conflation of atheism with meaninglessness and fatalism and this idea that this is like a personal phase that they're going through, they're just going a bit nuts. It's not something that they truly believe in or they truly have evidence for. That is where we think that the persecution of atheism lies in. And we say, what happens when you collectivize, right? Because once again, they don't deal with what we're saying. If Tawfiq comes and tries to trivialize this by saying, what happens when 5 people are sitting together? What happens is you have to ask, why are those 5 people sitting together? And that forces people to, in the public forum, engage with why atheism, what atheism is, why atheism is important, and so on and so forth. We think collectivization is the process of bringing this out into the public forum, and bringing it out into the public forum means what? That if I'm an atheist and I'm sitting at home and I'm crying because my parents are forcing me to take part in pujas that I don't want to, I can go to a place and say, I don't know why these people just don't understand that I don't think there is a God. I don't think there is a God because anytime that I've prayed believe in God, God has not helped me, or whatever it is, right? And we think that this kind of safe space and the creation and the ability for atheists to gather and simply like talk about the fact that they are atheists is still a benefit for them, because it allows them to lead certain kinds of lives. And we think that if they in these conversations there are disagreements, if there is violence, we think that atheism will branch out. And this is something that we think has happened in religion and will of course happen in atheism. Because understand, collectivization does not mean the creation of a monolith. If you can have Catholicism, which is something where you do actually have these kind of blasphemy laws, and still have a Protestantism emerge from that, we think you can have a scientific, rationalist, atheist library church and still have a chaos theory atheist collectives emerge from that as well. Because we think that the capacity to collectivize in different ways and by different bunches of people exists in our model, not in theirs. But before I move on to the third theme of how collectivization will affect atheism, your question.
If this collectivization is to understand whose truth is more relative in the sense of its proof, what is it that leads you to also allow them if their truth is not actually as true as yours?
I don't understand that, because the point is no truth is as true, like there's no fixed conception of truth is the point that we're trying to make. The point that we're trying to make is, okay, what you're saying could be true, could not be true, prove it. That is the point of the collective, and we think that that is where this collective is different from any other collective. And again, they really don't understand, because what we're saying is even if the collective does become dogmatized, even if it does become something that where there is only one consensus, people will branch out, people will create collectives for different kinds of atheism. And we think in that sense our need of creating a safe space for atheists remains intact. And this is where we talked about how will atheism change with the onset of collectivization, because they come up and they say, right now look, Dawkins controls the message, and therefore he will control the message when atheism becomes a collective as well. Except, why does Dawkins hold the platform right now? Because there are, 3 atheists in the public forum that exist and that propound and talk about their atheism. We think that when you have atheist collectives, there are going to be 100 websites for atheism. There are going to be 100 books about atheism. There are going to be people coming and meeting in parks and yelling about atheism. And we think that is when you will think that atheism has different dimensions. That is when you realize that no, atheism is not just the belief that science is the best, but it's also the belief that perhaps there is not a personified being, but a designed being, and so on and so forth. And we think that in that context, atheism stands to benefit as well. We are very, very proud of it.
Alright, the moment Namrata begins the 3 thematizations of this debate as only about collectivization. What is collectivization is equal to standardization? Are there benefits? Are there change? That's a fundamental problem, because that's not where the debate begins from. The debate begins from the question, is there a need for this collectivization in the first place? You don't begin with this debate by saying, are there benefits or no? You explore the need for those benefits and the absolute necessity of those benefits to come to atheists in the first place. Which is where we aren't saying they aren't providing a need in the first place, but let's explore what the needs are in terms of the contextualization. She says that but social movements keep on doing standardization in terms of collectivization that does not necessarily equal to standardization, because social movements actually function on identity markers. An LGBTQ movement, he's an LGBTQ movement, you can recognize him based on his sexual organs, therefore differentiate us because we look similar. Our truth is not relative. Our truth is absolute in the terms that you can't say you are not a gay man or you are not like a lesbian. There's a definitiveness in terms of who's a lesbian, who's a gay, in terms of who's a female, who's a male. Therefore, social movements function on absolute identity markers. Therefore, they can seek for that representation based on an absolute truth of what it means to be an LGBTQ person or a feminist or a person who believes in that green movement. Therefore, that's where atheism is different. different, because then they say our truth is relative and that's what we want to prove. Except there are two problems. What is preventing you from providing that proof in status quo? And secondly, who do you want to prove it to? If the problem is, if someone believes in hedonism and someone believes in nihilism, what's the exclusive harm that's coming to the atheist movement that requires this debate to happen and for both of them to furnish that proof in this like atheist collective? What is the exclusive value of this debate and providing a proof by those hedonistic and those nihilistics? That's what they had to show you. They had to show you the absolute exclusive value of this conclusive proof being provided by either side in a like say an atheist collective benefiting the atheist movement in and of itself. They haven't shown you that. They haven't shown you that in the absence of a higher authority deciding which proof is better than the other proof, there's a problem with atheism, because that's what they're arguing in and of itself. Truth being relative. Truth is relative in status quo simply because those hedonistics believing in themselves as atheists are as much atheists as nihilists, and that's where the moment a nihilist doesn't have the capacity to make sure the other isn't considered atheist, truth is relative and truth is being maintained as relative. The problem becomes the moment they want to argue this identification of status quo, because that's where it becomes problematic, because then it becomes an absolute standardization, because your movement has to, your collective, which is why you aren't in status quo prevented from 5 people sitting together and being questioned for being atheists. There's an institutionalization of that sitting together which is problematic, because now you have to sit together wearing the same logo, you have to sit together with a particular text, you have to sit together and have like say a sermon before to the leader of this collective group, which is problematic because now they're standardizing a normative structure is being put forward to that group discussion, which goes outside the avenues of what it means to be an atheist and what are the problems that atheists attach themselves to. Because the moment within that group of 5 people there are relative truths in and of itself, where one can't prove his or her truth, he's not allowed to be sit in that group discussion and then be a part of this atheist collective, and that's fundamentally problematic, and that's the branching out that disallows you from having representation in the first place. Because then moving on to say like a religion person asks you, now you can give him a proof. You can give him proof in status quo also. If a religious person asks you, recommend him God is not great by Christopher Hitchens or the God delusion by Richard Dawkins. Why do you need hundreds of books saying the same thing, that God is not great or the God does not exist? People know that's what atheists believe. It's not like people don't know what atheists believe. That's why atheists are recognized belief throughout centuries of the world, which is why a move towards the modern secular state means that one case of say persecution of atheists that they've run through simply because it's not a narrative that exists in society today. We've moved far away from that. That's why irrespective of whether atheist has become a president or not, that does not prevent that. That's why like Donald Trump for example, he criticized Hispanics, Muslims, all that. But do you hear something about atheists being killed and atheists being persecuted? No, because there's no narrative within the modern secular state and the modern secular society being against atheists. That narrative doesn't exist. Simply because someone's persecuted, someone's persecuted for everything throughout. You can't just pick one example, exaggerated need for a collective. People are persecuted for say liking cats. Doesn't mean you form collective for everything that you persecuted against. Those instances are being protected. And they had to show you why the walls of court. That's fundamentally problematic for them to say the police won't listen to you simply because an atheist. That's a far exaggerated line of questioning, and it's outside the realm of the society that we believe in. We don't think there are disregards of those ideas within this modern secular society that we believe in. You can't question the religion, you can't question the state, but you can question the state's ability to provide preferential treatment to one religion or the other, or to disregard the preferential treatment to those atheists. That's what you can do in status quo. That's what's happening. That's why those sort of like say any form of affirmative action based on religion is not allowed in modern secular state, and that's something in status quo that's happening. So therefore a collective doing that, a collective that's branched out on this very idea that truth is relative, therefore identities are relative in the first place, is not giving you any exclusive benefit in that regard. You're POI.
Yash, when differential abilities of religion to provide certain resources comes into question, the state tells atheists that you have no church for us to dispense it to. Doesn't this give an alternative for us to have that opportunity?
Okay, what are those beliefs? Say Alcohol Anonymous in a church, except church predicates itself on the fact that I will tell you not to drink alcohol because Jesus says so. The church provides you on the fact that I will provide you food. Why? Because you should not use contraceptives. In our atheist scenario, that's not necessary for us to do. Tomorrow, do you want to provide food to people under that logo where you want them to believe in this logo and thus I will give you food? The state can run homeless shelters. You can argue for state running homeless shelter, providing food, providing employment. What's preventing you from doing that as individual? Why do you need to have an hierarchized identity where me being an atheist is what necessarily needs me to lobby the state to provide homeless shelter in the first place? We don't think there's an exclusive benefit of those abilities and benefits being provided to citizens in the state predicated on the idea of an atheist collective in the first place. Secondly, in terms of identification, in terms of this debate, the question firstly you ask yourself is what is atheism? Because the question isn't what is an atheist collective. What is atheism in and of itself? And are there problems within this understanding and conception of atheism? Atheism is say a negative belief system. It does not believe in say a positive idea of what feelings are, but rather negation of what exists in status quo in terms of belief system. And it's not just the idea that God exists. It's the manner in which organized religion exists. And there are certain markers of organized, because if God is, everyone believes it. No, that's not the problem. The problem is people convince others on those facts. People believe in certain ideas of certain insignia and praise certain and glorification of certain beliefs on those ideas. Those are markers of organized religion, not right now. No, those are markers of organized religion that atheism is against. It's not just the idea that people believe in God. It's the man which is portrayed in society in terms of organized religion. It's hallmarks of propaganda. It's asking for new followers. And read the context slide. That's what you demand of this atheist collective, to look for new followers. The moment you ask for new followers, believe in us, that's what you're belying the fundamental basis of atheism. That's the paradox of relativity. But the moment you say everything's relative, but for you to say everything's relative, you have to have a universal maxim in the first place. That's the fundamental problem that we want to move away from. The moment you say we don't want anyone to believe in something, but for you to do that, you have to say we want something, everyone to come together and listen to us in the first place, is the fundamental problem, is the fundamental antithesis of what atheism fundamentally is. Therefore, the problem then becomes, we want the truth to be relative. We've actually shown you how characterization by Prime Minister in and of itself belies the idea that truth is relative and statical. Secondly, people are hounding you. We believe we're adequately proven to in modern secular state, legal mechanism, social mechanism, political mechanism ensure that people, even if they hound you in a worst case, in a best case that they're running off their scenario, there are absolute legal mechanisms that are there to provide you. Lastly, in terms of social acceptance, accept what do you want acceptance as? If you want acceptance as an atheist, as an individual, or even as a collective, what is this idea of identification and this idea of acceptance? How do you ask for acceptance? If you want to ask for acceptance, you need to have an identity marker to show these are the people we want to be identified. How do you show that? Do you give them an ID card? Do you give them like a slip of paper like I am a recognized atheist? How do you do that? The idea being that you as an individual, as an atheist, those are recognized things in society. What is the change that you want to move forward as an atheist collective is something that we want to. We just can't throw the word acceptance. What is this level of acceptance? Is absent in status quo? If people are hounding, that's not true at all. If it's like an absence of a legal ID card that you can have either way. For all those things, we're very, very proud of it.
Mr. Speaker, all of us collectivize for a particular reason. And there is a need that emerges because of which we collectivize. This collectivization happens on why is it that we need to collectivize, on what basis do we need to collectivize, who do we need to collectivize against, and what is it that we're talking to them about. These things are questions that they have not answered. And mind you, what they've argued to you is status quo. Where they say collectivization means 5 of us sit in the library, that's something that you can do right now too. What does this collectivization talk about? The structure of an organization that will draw heavy parallels, including symbols, leaders, pieces of association, text, aggressive campaigning. So don't let them lie and say, we will all sit, 5 of us will sit in library and we will discuss, and that is collectivization. It is the standardization that we are talking to you about, which will lead to that collectivization as opposed to the state. To tell them that we are together, this is what we stand for, is something that is essential, right? What will the state understand out of this collectivization? So it can't be 5 of us standing and saying, we are atheists. You have to tell them what is that you're campaigning for. What do you need from the state? And for that, you will have to standardize. And those are the harms of standardizations that we spoke to you about. In terms of, if, say for example, Dawkins is a leader, now you institutionalize it like that leadership because he can prove it better. What they've spoken to you about is now we will have like a math Olympiad where everybody gets to prove whoever proves better is still not the best because truth is relative. Then what are you achieving out of this? Because by the end of what you're saying we need to all give proofs. That's something that you can do in status quo. But what does this discussion specifically do? It values one truth over the other. Because for the institutionalization, you will have to say something to them. You can't say we have 100 books of saying this is what we are, because that's what you do in status quo too. That acceptance of that truth from that popular population comes from what you are. But let's not like reach to that level at all. Because is there acceptance? Collectivization doesn't mean acceptance. acceptance. They've said that suddenly there isn't acceptance, something that we go against. So just their analysis for not the acceptance not being there is, when I enter the court, it says in God we trust, but it doesn't say for those who don't, we fuck them. It says that we will trust you on the basis of you being an atheist too, while simultaneously acknowledging your ability to not have a faith. So for you to say that people are scared or hounded, give us better analysis, because we've told you it isn't any, because you can challenge the state on that differential treatment against another faith. Except when you enter that race, you enter a race of something that you've been against. What will I aggressively campaign for? I will aggressively campaign for you being an atheist. I want you to believe in what I'm believing in. But what I'm believing is, there is no belief. Exactly. You will lose mass flack and the people who are atheists at the point at which you say that atheism will now turn into a belief. Atheism will now turn into something that it has despised for ages, which is religion. And that's the exact problem of why is it that their move is antithetical to, say for example, religion to begin with. Third idea. Listen, we think that people don't value proof and there is some questionability. Why don't they value proof? They don't value proof because you haven't been able to show scientific proof. It's because they don't value your idea. Even if 200 people possess that idea, they will continuously outnumber you because God says so. The value of your idea is what determines why people will listen to you, and that's an idea that they already have. People don't like you because you don't have faith, not because you aren't 20 in number or 200, because they already know you are. And that's a form of acceptance that is never going to come, because that acceptance comes from the idea, not the number of people who hold it. And the number of people now holding it gets fragmented, which is exactly the problem, because you institutionalize that fragmentation. In status quo, I can be a proud hedonist and a proud nihilist, but now you say a hedonist is a more truer form of an atheist than the other one. Who decides what's truer? Then you will need a leadership who will decide which is the better truth for that proof to be acceptable. The point at which you do that, you inevitably standardize. Therefore, Dawkins becomes the father of deciding which child solved the better math sum, and that's the exact problem that stands from their side of the house. The last idea is, listen, we think some people have for long pushed this. We need to give individuals a safe space, like Alcoholics Anonymous. What is it that atheism strongly campaigns against? The fact that the distribution of certain resources, that the acceptance of you as a citizen in the state should not be based on certain identity markers. That you should not enter Alcoholics Anonymous and be driven because you're a Christian, but the fact that all of you, and I can pass water to Yash, irrespective of what his identity is, because I want him to prioritize other identities rather than being recognized as a Muslim, as a Hindu, and therefore antithetical to the very idea of atheism. Extremely proud to oppose.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's replace atheism with homosexuality, right? Collectivization is dogma because homosexuality is something you can do within your room. Truth is relative. Heteronormity is also something that can be relative according to them. And what is the need of having pride parades, right? Because here's the idea over here, right? We have to try and understand as to when Yash says, what is the need, right? What is the need of, let's say, people having to come on atheism, because nobody faces any discrimination, right? Okay, fair enough. What is the harm then, right? And that's the idea over here. But this debate is not run on what is the need, therefore give us the need. Okay, we've given you a need. Even if we somehow say we haven't given you a need, what is the harm? People like cats, let them form a bloody cat forum, right? That is the idea over here. If they're saying that the only active harm is coming out of the fact that religion is becoming dogmatic, understand this, right? Because if they're not understood what truth is relative means, right? Truth is relative is not some everything is up for questioning. It is based in the fact that atheism, which believes there is no God, and because God doesn't have sacrosanct beliefs, you can question the things atheists have said, not just generally truth is relative and therefore truth is relative, right? Because Tawfiq starts his speech with the most retarded word I've ever heard, right? Truth is relative is also a statement, therefore it is not relative, right? That's ridiculous, right? Because the idea here is truth is relative within the paradigm of what atheism is coming to mean and therefore what God means, right? Therefore they can't run this argument that relativity exists both ways. You are now becoming dogmatic, you are now becoming objective, therefore atheism is dying, right? More importantly, right? And it's something that you have to understand, right? When they go ahead and say aggressively campaign, symbols, these are all things we don't believe in. This is something we've talked to you about, right? Atheism is is not in fundamental opposition to organized religion. It is in fundamental opposition to God. It is not saying Christianity is bad. It is saying even people who don't believe in organized religion, people who believe in God, you are still wrong, right? It is not saying we are only in opposition to organized religion, right? So when they say aggressively campaign, how will that help, right? Because when you are on a talk show and you are saying atheism is good, listen to us about atheism, that provides awareness, right? So when they go and say, how can any form of awareness happen? How is it being disseminated? It might happen because 5 people are talking in the library. That's not the point, right? They can continue to try and trivialize and not engage, which I try to understand. With engagement, they will lose, right? Because they haven't provided any analysis as to why necessarily when you talk about things, they are more accepted. Why is homosexuality accepted? Because of pride parades, right? And that is the idea over here. They can't run this argument that no, homosexuality also has come out because literally people have remained within their sphere and not really come out in the open, right? But more importantly, and it's something that they have to engage with, right? Because Mridul's entire speech was dealt with collectivization as dogma, right? Something that he hasn't been able to prove when we continuously tell you that collectivization itself is not dogma, right? Because by that logic, all social movements are dogma, right? It is the nature of those movements, it is the nature of those beliefs of those movements that allow it to be questioned, right? So for example, women's rights and feminism can also be looked at as dogmatic, right? Therefore, Simone de Beauvoir can become a dogmatic personality. But the idea here is this: you have second wave feminism, you have third wave feminism, you have people coming up and saying we believe in other things, let this happen, right? And we believe atheism can function on these lines, right? Because they haven't provided to us one reason as to why religion, something so dogmatic, could also split into Catholic and Protestant and to Shia and Sunni, right? Because they haven't provided the reason as to why something so dogmatic by their own characterization has the ability to split and not necessarily be completely, hero worshipping dogmatic, right? But with atheism, it's completely different. Something again they have not engaged with, because atheism is not based in dogmatism, right? Finally, Tawfiq's speech, truth is relative. I've already engaged with that. And Yash, right? Because Yash starts his speech with collectivization is something that yes, it is spoken about. That's not important. What is the need, guys? Tell us what is the need, right? And here's the thing: the need is very simple. If I am being hounded for saying I am atheist and I'm genuinely out there, and people are like, you know what, atheism, I've heard about this. Maybe just tell me something more. That in itself is also a +1 gain, right? But more importantly, we've told you historical analysis, how generally women who have gone against the state, women who have gone against religion, have constantly been said godless hippies, and with that, we're very proud to
Okay, everyone is going to do. Yes.